2022. Man, I can't believe it. It's already February. It's going by quick. Let me tell you, man. It's been an eventful first month of 2022. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you guys have been enjoying your year so far. So this week, released an episode on the podcast, our Data Science Podcast, with Carlos Mercado, his second time on the show, talking about decentralization for data scientists. What's DeFi all about? What's Web3 all about? So if you're interested in all that and how it relates to you as a data scientist, check out that episode just released today. So it's there on all streaming platforms. By the way, if you're listening to this, whether you're on LinkedIn, whether you are on The Room or on YouTube, go and rate the podcast, man. Y'all should go and give this thing 5 stars. You can directly rate the podcast right there in the Spotify app if you have it. It now allows you to do that, or on Apple, wherever you watch this or listen to this thing, man. Just go rate it. Or at the very least, smash the like on this video if you're watching on LinkedIn. Let's I can't let John Cronin Daliana beat me, man. Got to be the premier data science podcast, The Art of Data Science. So be sure to go ahead and smash that like, give it a 5-star review. Only 5-star reviews, please. So yeah, definitely tune into that. Comet office hour earlier this week was fantastic, man. These things are getting better and better every week. We're getting more and more people on to talk about their experience as data scientists. This week we brought on our good friend, I think everybody here knows her, Shantanu Atuli. She came on the show, as well as Ronnie Huang from Google AI. He's a research scientist there. And then somebody, if you guys don't know, but you should know her, Susan Shu Chang. She's awesome. We talked a lot about what it's like, a day in their life at work, what experimentation is like for them. Talked about the ins and outs of hyperparameter tuning, best practices for doing that. It's a great conversation. So definitely check that out. That's on my YouTube channel. It's also on Comet's YouTube channel. And on Comet's YouTube channel, they've got the bits clipped out. So it's, if you just want one piece for it, go ahead and check out those little clips. And we also got a bunch of blog posts that accompany that series, so definitely check me out on Medium if you haven't already. Medium at Data Science Harp. All my stuff is it's free for everybody to view and read. Always open. So go ahead, check it out. Smash that follow on Medium. Give it a few claps. Follow me on Twitter as well. Data Science Harp. Want to start connecting with more of y'all. Speaking of connecting, man, I got a chance to hang out with some people earlier this week. Hung out with Makiko virtually a lot this week. That was great. Also hung out with some community members, Christoph Ogrebeck and Renata. So it was great seeing y'all. It's been some time. But now we are here, and it's Friday. It's time for these happy hours. I'm excited for it, man. Been a long week, and another long week to come. By the way, if you are in the Bay Area, if you're in Sacramento, I return back February 13th, come back to Sacramento. It's been quite some time, 2.5 years to be exact, since I was home. So if you're there, hit me up. I want to link with you guys. So let's kick the hour off with a question, man. I'm curious, what is your favorite API? What's your favorite API? Whether it's a web API for some library package, what have you? What is your favorite API? What is it that you like about that API? And how, maybe how is it different from not so good APIs? Let's kick it off with Vin, and then we can go to Russell and either one of the Erics. We got Eric Gatonga and Eric Sims in the building. So yeah, let's hear it.
I don't have a good answer for this one. I don't have a favorite API. It's you kind of caught me flat-footed, so I'm gonna have to defer. Let somebody else go. I don't really have a favorite one.
Russell, how about you?
Yes, so my answer is not a great deal different from Vin's. I'm not sure I've got a great favorite, although I would say the API that works, definitely my favorite, because they have a habit of being a bit temperamental here and there. And those that are easily configurable, so some interesting data. So web APIs can be good. I can't think of a brilliant one off the top of my head, but let me think about that a bit more, and I'll try and think of a specific one, but definitely, the one that works is always my favorite.
Yeah. Vince says the one that follows the documentation. Yes, that is also a good quality of good APIs. Just one that where you follow documents and it does what it's supposed to do. Personally, I like the Twitter API a lot, man, because it's very intuitive to me how, like, the way I interact with the Twitter app, like all the endpoints have the same name as how I interact with the app. So that's very, very important as just like a natural extension, I think, of using the the API versus the application itself. It's pretty good. And in terms of library APIs, like scikit-learn, I think is awesome because it's super, super consistent. That API is so consistent. Doesn't matter what algorithm you use, .fit, .predict, fit transform, whatever, what have you, like it's all the same. I think that's a very good quality of an API. I've been learning the PyTorch API this week. That's been a lot of fun. I'm enjoying that. Eric Sims, what about you? By the way, y'all joining on LinkedIn, if y'all joining on YouTube, if you got questions, let me know. We're taking questions. Go for it, Eric Sims.
Yeah, so definitely scikit-learn's like what I've probably used the most. And I remember like vividly during my master's program when I like realized or like made the connection of like, oh, there's these uniform things. I can fit, I can predict, whatever. And it just like, it made everything seem like way more approachable, like way less scary because I didn't have to memorize so many different things or always be Googling it since I'm always Googling other stuff instead. But to pick something that I haven't used a lot, but I think is interesting and would like to use some more is the Reddit API, because it's got so many different pieces to it, being able to, and it's great for network stuff, because you've got the topics, but then you've got the Redditors, but then you've got the Redditors who replied to other Redditors, and there's just so many like different layers to it, and a lot that can come out of it. And so I think it's PRAW, P-R-A-W. I think that PRAW is kind of, I don't really like the name, but it's the Python Reddit API wrapper. No thanks. But yeah, so I think that I just think Reddit's cool in general, and so I've used it a little bit, keen to use it more.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've actually never looked at the documentation or played around with the Reddit API, but in terms of like bits of information, bits of like things you can get like payload from an API, I find the Spotify API to be super, super fascinating. There's so much going on there. Like you can collect a lot of interesting data from Spotify. Great API there. Shout out to Vivian in the house. Haven't seen Vivian in so long. Good to see you again, Vivian. So question coming in from Kosteb right here on LinkedIn. Expanding on the question, I love that. What do you guys look for in good APIs? What are some red flags in APIs? That's a good question. I was recently reading the book. Actually, the book I was reading was on Kosteb's recommendation as software engineering at Google, and they have an entire section at just talking all about documentation and the importance of documentation. And yeah, I think a good quality of a good API is one that just has documents. That's just whatever it is that I'm looking for is so easy to find, right? It just tells me what is the purpose of this thing, how do I use it. Has a too long, didn't read. It's just, it tells me what I need to know very quickly and makes it easy for me to get to work. If anybody else has inputs on that, I'd love to hear. Eric Sims, Eric Gatonga, anyone. Otherwise, if you guys got questions coming in, let me know. Vin, go for it.
Yeah, I think the thing for me, like documentation, that consistency, kind of things we've been talking about, but also if you got a limit or if you throttle or if you got a cap of some sort, please tell us. Like, don't be coy about your limitations, because you can spend weeks trying to figure out what's wrong on my end. And then, oh, you have caps. Oh, okay. That would have been good to have in the documentation. Oh, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, the little things, the things you don't think about documenting that could cause somebody else to have absolute pain. And if you could, implementation coding samples, like a GitHub repo, would be awesome as well. Just give me a baseline implementation, because there's probably something in there I didn't think of, and maybe you didn't document very clearly, or I didn't read very well. So those two right there. I mean, if it has like AWS has sample implementations for everything, and just having something like that makes my job so much easier, and I will not be blowing up your support line, which is probably going to be a good thing for your company too.
Yeah, great points. Vivian, any input? We're talking about APIs, but I know you joined in a little bit late there. But
yeah, I was just thinking of how many times I've used frustrating APIs, well, that have bad documentation. And then I've blamed myself. So if you're struggling with an API, it's not you, you're not stupid. An API is only as good as they make it easy to use. So
yeah, and in that book, Software Engineering at Google, they talk about like knowing your audience, and you know, whoever writes the documentation for an API, like it's one thing, like you are the person who maybe are most familiar with the API, but you can't write from that perspective. You have to write from the perspective of the person that is reading the documentation. So kind of optimizing for the reader's experience. So yeah, that means you consider the person's level of experience, you consider the person's domain expertise or knowledge, and you consider why it is that they might be coming to this API. Then you also got to think about, okay, is this person like the type of person who might just stumble upon the API and just hope they find something? Or is this somebody who's going to be like laser focused, like I know what it is that I want, just make your documentation clear, let me get there and figure it out. All good considerations for documentation. So if anybody has any more thoughts on APIs, do let me know. But we got more questions coming in from Costa here. Russell, go for it.
I was just going to say very quickly, building upon your comment about Spotify, especially from the last couple of years, given the lockdown restrictions, etc., the Netflix API would probably be really interesting to get your teeth into, because I'm sure viewing habits of people for Netflix has increased far more than listening habits on Spotify.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I never even thought to check and see if Netflix had like a developer API or anything like that. But yeah, definitely worth checking out. Good one. Yeah, I think I'll take a look at that. Kosab got a question about models in production. All right, cool. Let's do this, man. Any tips on do's and don'ts for model monitoring? Common hidden challenges, red herrings, or things like that. I think when it comes to advice and tips, it's probably more succinct to get the don'ts than the do's. Right? I don't know. Maybe that's just a personal opinion there, but let's go to Vin here, and then if anybody else has tips, let me know. I might pull a couple out of the brain as well. Vin, any tips for do's and don'ts for model monitoring?
Monitoring, like your short-term monitoring and long-term monitoring are two different metric sets. That's like the one thing that caught me off guard, was what you're measuring week to week versus what you're measuring 2 months, 3 months down the road. There's two different objectives. So that often means that you have two different sets of metrics that you're tracking, because the biggest failures only start becoming obvious over longer timescales. And so it's like, I didn't get that for, I don't know, a year, maybe longer than that. That you could just do another set of metrics and you should monitor that. And long-term, those trends are important too. Like that's my biggest one. And the rest are just don'ts. Like, don't forget that you have users and monitoring can't in any way impact them. Not saying I've done something that was like overburdensome logging that may have slowed things down. And don't keep your logs in the same system as production runs in. That's another, don't do that either. Not saying I've done either one of those things. I've just seen someone.
So when it comes to like you mentioned short-term, long-term monitoring, like what are some examples of short-term monitoring? So I mean, if correct me if I'm wrong here, I would think maybe short-term monitoring, you want to look at just maybe comparing basic variance and how scattered your predictions are if it's for a particular task. Then maybe more long-term is looking at like data drift and things like that, or am I misunderstanding?
No, I mean, short term, you're looking for basic accuracy and failure scenarios like catastrophic failure, because short term, usually if something goes wrong, it's really obvious. And longer term, what you're really looking for is some indication that you have a massive flaw in your model that's only going to bite you, say, once every 6 months or once a year. And if you're not watching for it, and it's always different. It's not like there's one metric that I'm watching for. More times than not, I'm really watching for users and their behaviors, because they'll react by abandoning the product or abandoning the workflow. at really strange times and suddenly. And that'll be kind of my hint that there's something going on that I need to start tracking around whatever they were doing in that one moment. And there's something longer term there that I need to monitor. And that's what I'm really talking about is you've got the short-term stuff, which is obvious, but it's also the long-term. You're looking for anomalies in user behavior. That's been my kind of go-to for long-term monitoring. Anything which all of a sudden shows up and then stops. Like it looks like people are having a hard time and then they're not having a hard time. And if that's not associated with some sort of incident ticket or training or, one of the normal, somebody called us and told us that it wasn't working for this reason and we fixed it. But when they're not, it's usually indicative of some sort of longer term anomaly that's only going to show itself once in a while, where it's kind of a low data set class of problem that I'm running into that my model is terrible at and I didn't know about.
Yeah, and kind of another maybe on a somewhat related tangent is don't believe your aggregate accuracy metric, right? Sometimes I think you might need to drill down a little bit more, look at various segments and see how your model is performing on different slices of data, because some of that could get buried in the aggregate metric. Yeah, I guess maybe, just in terms of things for drift, feature distributions of training data, live data, right? Correlations between features, I think, is important for detecting drift, target distributions, things like that. Any other tips, Eric, Russell, Vivian, either Eric, any tips on model monitoring?
So I was just typing something in there, may as well speak up now. So I was going to talk about drift, actually you mentioned it already, but also bias, and just say that if you're monitoring to identify drift and bias, that's going to be far more easily detectable in your long-term monitoring rather than a short-term. Not that it's impossible, if you've got something that's gratuitous or just extreme, you'll pick it up in the short term. But I would imagine that under most circumstances, you're going to want to concentrate that type of monitoring on long term only, because it's just going to be those extreme cases you'll pick up in short term.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Costa, hopefully you found that helpful. And, if you want to join in the chat, man, you're always welcome. But I want to see what's up with Vivian, man. It's been so long. How you been? What you been up to? How's the new job?
Hey, it's been really busy and intense. And I have to say that when you work at Meta, you have to actually do stuff every day. So, I don't know. It feels like the weeks kept getting away from me. I kept thinking I wanted to come back and then the weeks just kept getting away. But another cool thing that happened is I moved to the Bay. So I'm here in the Bay and the weather is awesome. So
nice. Well, I'll be in San Francisco later this month. I'm planning to do a little get together. Mikiko, Mark, and Co, and maybe Dahlia. Cool. I think she's out there, so I'll definitely get in touch with you as well. I think it'll be fun. We'll have a good time.
Mark was really helpful when I had been messaging him when we were going to come, being like, hey, where should we look? And he had the scoop of all the good places to go look. So yeah.
Where in the Bay are you currently living?
Right now we just are in an Airbnb. It's in Redwood City. Nice. But we got a place that we move into in a month. It's in Alameda. And nice. Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
That's awesome. Tenderloin, great spots. I've got some crazy stories about shit that's happened to me in the Tenderloins. Don't go there. Past a certain, just don't go there any time of day. All right, you guys, let's see if there's questions coming in. Please do let me know whether you are watching on LinkedIn, whether you're watching on YouTube, wherever it is that you're joining from. If you got questions, please do let me know, because it is the time.
I think this is kind of a pretty generic question, but I was thinking about it this morning as I was debugging, and that was I don't know the best way to approach debugging, how to even start other than just what I already do myself, which is definitely dependent on the situation. But, one of the obvious ones is, print here where you think something is happening. So I'm just going to grab that before anybody else takes it. But Like, how do you, like, when something goes wrong, where do you start? How do you get going to dig down and figure it out and debug it? And I'm kind of curious because I want to know, like, if there are like specific tools or something or functionality, like, because, you know, there are things in like VS Code that I'm sure would make my life easier if I knew they were there and I knew how to use them. So anything that would involve that would be super helpful.
I was gonna say print debugging is one of my go-tos as well. But then it just, you know, apart from the VS Code stuff, there's this website called like Python Visual Tutor that I found to be really, really helpful. So it just kind of shows like you can enter in your code, and it shows like how everything's put into the call stack, and then what all the intermediate kind of elements look like, and then what's happening in the loop. It's really helpful. So I can share a link to that, the Python Visual Tutor. But yeah, in terms of like VS Code extensions, I mean, a good linter I think is helpful before you submit code. But I'd be happy to hear. Vivian, what do you use to debug? Russell, Vin, Eric G.
Like, what is, like, there's like the little red dots, or there's things like step into, or like, is that part of debugging? Is that what that is? Maybe that's where I was going. Sorry, go ahead, Viv.
Well, I was just going to say that I actually don't use those tools that much because I end up just using the internal Facebook tools so often. So, and they have like their own built-in like debugging stuff. So I'm sorry that I can't be more helpful.
Yeah. I know there's something that the Python debugger, I mean, you can look that up as well. Vin, what are your tips for OG tips for debugging?
All right, so first, download Borland. It's the only compiler and development environment you ever want to use. Aside from just dating myself as way past 40, yeah, figure out the basics of breakpoints if you haven't already. I'm getting the feeling you already know what a breakpoint is and you already know how to step through code.
No, I don't.
No.
I only see these things, but I've never actually done it. So this is what I'm like trying to ask.
There's like two kinds of
I don't know
debugging.
the words.
No, I got you.
Okay.
So there's two types of debugging. One is when stuff blows up, you know, and you're actually getting an error and it's telling you something is going wrong. More times than not, that error will tell you what line it is. It's lying to you. It's really someplace further up that's messing up, but you're seeing the actual failure further downstream. So yeah, just put breakpoints in and figure out, you know, follow your key variables, figure out what it is based on the message, if it's meaningful. Because I know some Python error messages are amazing and some look like they intentionally don't want you to figure out what's broken. They're, you know, a lot like Java that way too, where it's just like, what are you talking about? What does that mean? So yeah, try to parse through the error message. If it doesn't make any sense, just breakpoint your way backwards. Figure out what it is that, because that's really the hardest part, is figuring out what really blew up and what it is that caused it. And a lot of times that's just working backwards. And so, yeah, just put breakpoints in and then you can step through the code. It's harder when you're trying to debug like a UI, but now there's a whole lot more debug tools for UIs that are, especially web UIs. So for like web pages and that sort of thing, yeah, the tools are a whole lot better than they used to be. And you can even step through that now. And then there's the other kind of failure where it's like, this doesn't work, but it doesn't blow up. And that's the really terrible debugging, where it doesn't error. It simply does something really strange. And they don't tell you the greatest steps to reproduce, because when you're doing machine learning, like, there aren't any. So they'll give you like this vague front end isn't doing this thing. And then you just gotta, this is the ugliest thing, is when you have to go backwards and figure out, is it the front end? Is it a back end? Or has my model really messed up? Because they, at least some people that I've worked with, enjoy blaming the model when they don't understand how their own code works. And so I have to sort of prove their code's busted. And that's literally a critical piece of debugging, is not always believing it's your code and looking at everything else that it could be to make sure the bug's actually yours before you do the horrible thing of figuring out how your model possibly is serving this terrible, terrible inference that's causing all of this stuff downstream. Because more times than not, you have to put in a ton of logging in order to even catch what you might be serving that could potentially lead to whatever obscure behavior that they've got downstream. And so debugging, when it comes to actual model behavior, then you're talking about a ton of logging and then tracing back from those logs. And then it gets ugly because you have to figure out why your the bigger the model, the less likely it is you're ever going to figure it out. And that's really the problem, is it might do it once and then 3 months later it does it again. And that's all you have to go on. Literally, there's just 2 tickets. Did this thing again. And it's, you almost have to advertise like, I'm sorry, I don't know. We should just put something in place to catch this and make sure it doesn't ever get any further than, the back end, and apologize profusely or something. So yeah, debugging is actually really complicated when it comes to that second piece where it doesn't fail, but it doesn't behave as expected.
Thank you very much, Vin. Go for it.
Oh, I was just saying, thanks. That made sense. Yeah, that was great.
There's some great tips here from Russell. Russell, go for it. And then I think Antonio joined. Antonio and Mark, if you guys got any tips for debugging, now's the time to compile them and share. Russell, go for it.
So I just put a quick comment in there that was supplemental to what Vin was saying at the time, just separating out kind of proactive, preemptive debugging, looking for potential issues if there isn't a complete failure, versus the panic mode debugging where something does blow up and you really need to drill in and find whatever the issue is. And further, then I absolutely second Vin's point about the breakpoints. So you can step in and look, like compartmentalize the
looks like Russell
one
has frozen.
sequentially, rather than have to look at the entire thing, especially. Oh, am I coming back?
Yeah, you're back. You're back. All right. So looks like there's issues with that Russell.
This is all looking up on my side. I think I've got an issue.
Yeah. No worries. Kostab says writing a black box test helps when debugging. So there's some vocabulary words to look up there as well. So let's go to Mark or Antonio. Any tips?
I can get some tips. I just joined, so I don't know. Eric, yes, I do have 60-minute air supply in my closet with the door closed. I don't know what's already been discussed, but the first thing that pops into my head is, one, writing clean code in the first place. That doesn't say like you need to write production from the get-go, but writing clean enough code where there are going to be bugs. And so taking the extra time to actually like follow a style guide, Pepe or whatever language you're using, goes a really long way in having those variables. I think that's the baseline. But something that's been drilled into me from the engineering team when I'm running code now is like having logging. Having logging so critical just to see like, where did something break? Is it being logged the way you expect it? That's been extremely helpful for that, and being very thoughtful where you put your logs. Especially there's been times where like maybe I did like a for loop and all of a sudden I see my log popping up over and over and over again. I'm like, wait, the for loop's not supposed to work like that. Like, why is that happening, right? So there's things along those lines. In addition, going a little bit further, like you do like different raise exception errors within your code. That's also very helpful when doing your code. And then unit tests, both for after, because if you change code, the unit test will probably catch something if something breaks. But more importantly, what I found is when I do a unit test, because you're testing like, this is the expected logic that I wrote. And there's been so many times where I create a unit test and it fails immediately. And I'm like, oh, that is not doing what I expected. And that's causing like a lot of bugs from the get-go. More on the engineering side, I'm very thankful for engineers having continuous integration and deployment. And so when before I can even merge code or even get the PR review, it has to pass all the tests first before I even send it to engineer. So that's something that I expect many data scientists not know how to do. I don't know how to do it. I'm learning how to do it. I think Akiko posted a really great link recently for the GitHub Actions as a way to implement that. And then kind of go into like other things, there's debugging code, but also there's like debugging data. And so something I really work with a lot is I'll start with a dummy data set that I know what the outputs can be and run it through. And, am I getting the expected output from this dummy data set as compared to when you're working like a production data set that has like millions of rows or billions of rows? There's no way to really easily get that data quality down unless you have like a data quality team already implemented, and most orgs don't.
Thank you so much, Mark. Eric Gitonga in the chat says he remembers pulling his hair out in freshman intro to programming where a missed semicolon got him the wrong results. Took a day to figure it out. Code is producing output, but just the wrong output. Then he also says logging has definitely been helpful while playing around with compiling the Linux kernel just to figure out how it worked. Logging definitely helped in figuring out stuff that broke. Awesome. Antonio, are you still here? Oh, he's not. Costa on LinkedIn says regarding debugging, how much do you rely on code structure to help versus identifying? How much do you rely on code structures to help identifying issues, FP principles, atomic functions, strong types? I know the last one isn't Pythonic. Some questions to consider.
I can try to take a stab at that. I think something that thinking about my code structure is, I've been a big fan of either functional programming in R, but object-oriented programming in Python. And, if you're writing anything, this is how I started in academia, I had 0 functions. Just you run the script from beginning to end, all 300 lines, and it got the statistics for me to publish, right? That is horrible. And trying to debug that when something breaks, that's really rough. And so if you move towards actually like object-oriented programming, you have these classes, you have these functions with clear names, and everything is calling to certain things. And so when something breaks, I can clearly see in the code, oh yeah, this line called this function, and this function, this line right here, it broke. That's way easier to understand compared to like go to line 136 out of 300 and understand what went wrong.
Yeah, that's great tips. I remember I spent quite a few years writing code in SAS. When I was a biostatistician, and making that transition to like Python it just was so difficult for me to wrap my head around, because I think SAS is really just like it's more procedural, step-by-step type of thing. So you just run from top to bottom, get the results. Thank you for sharing that, Vin. Any other tips here? Vin says try catch is a new print statement. Awesome. Hey, yo, questions, keep them coming. Let's go. Questions coming on LinkedIn or on YouTube or here in the chat. Please do go for it.
Okay, right. This isn't a question, but I just got to I'm just going to throw one thing out. Yeah. I am super stoked because I have been I've been in my current role for just over 8 months. And shortly after starting my role, I got this project, and it was potentially going to be a little challenging, but not a huge deal. And it ended up being a thing that took forever. And I have been working across like all these different teams to get things developed to help make sure that the data is doing what it's supposed to be doing and validating and everything. And just today, finally, I finished the validation and figured out what I'm pretty sure the revenue impact will be over the next year, and there is a revenue impact, so that's good. And so I'm excited for it, but also I know now yay, analysis is done, but now it's okay, now it's on the product team's radar, but sticking with it and helping make sure that it gets seen through to completion. So I feel like I'm halfway across the bridge, even though it feels like I want to be all the way across the bridge, because my piece is the biggest piece is done, but I think we're only about halfway. But I'm stoked. I'm super happy about it because it's just been a monkey on my back for so long. So anyway, just want to throw that out there because I'm excited about it.
Congrats, man. That's awesome. Super happy for you. Loving stuff like that happens, man. So keep it up, Eric. Keep it up, man. Question from Mark. Go for it.
Yeah, so I have a question around data business models. So I'm in a DAO, Web3 business stuff. And one of the projects we're working on is building an analytics tool for NFT communities. Really fun project and just a good way to practice kind of like bringing something to market. Something I've been really exploring right now is just like, all right, cool. We have this idea of like some cool technology we're validating in the market, but what's the business model behind it? And like, does it make sense? Do those levers make sense? And a big part of that are COGS, so cost of goods sold. And when you're a data company, your goods are data. So how do you acquire data? How do you store that data with various APIs? And I'm just curious if anyone's done that, whether it's for a whole company or just for like a simple project. I'm mostly looking at Vin because I feel like he's done this before. But like, how do you go about determining, like scoping out, like what would be the expected costs of doing, processing and acquiring your data? I know AWS has like certain, and like you can look at APIs for the pricing. AWS is like a calculator, but like trying to figure out like how to like forecast, like, all right, when we release our MVP, it's gonna be this price, but like when we reach 10 customers or 100 customers, what does that price look like? And does the number still make sense?
I'm gonna go for it.
Yeah, that's like you're asking holy grail questions right there. So yeah, figuring out the cost of data it should be stable, but it isn't. You know what I mean? It should be a stable cost because you should only have known sources, but you're going to start generating data through processes, and you have to sort of assign costs to the data gathering side of that versus all the other things you're doing, like all the other reasons you're doing that process for. It's typically around a product where you'll have a feature and that feature generates data. And so part of the cost of implementation for that feature is data gathering, booked against data gathering. Part of that feature is booked against like the actual feature itself, the engineering platform. You have depreciation costs. You can also, I can't remember what the fancy word, like the finance word for it is, but you can write down some of the cost of developing a new product in a cool tax-ish way. And so that's going to go on to another line item. So that's why I'm saying, like, you're asking kind of voodoo questions and holy grail type questions, because it's not amortization. It's something, no, it's got a different, it's something else where you get a special tax break for it. And so it's written on a different line, like it's a cost of R&D something. Like I said, I'm just blanking on the name, but the financial calculations of all that is like somebody way smarter than I, as far as like what is the exact number that you would book. But I got to tell you, if you're in a startup or if you're in any sort of small organization, that number doesn't really matter. I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to project out costs long term, and you're not going to be able to do that in any sort of reliable way, because data costs are going to be something that you're trying to get towards zero. You want to make it as automated as possible, and you want to drive the cost, instead of going up, drive it down. So really, whatever you project today is going to be more, if you do it right, is going to be more than what it costs you in the future. So it doesn't really matter if your numbers are off a little bit. And you're also going to look at it as a commodity. It's an asset. And so your valuation actually increases based on the valuation of your data and the size of your data. And so it's going to go against your balance sheet. And so when you start talking about like data as a business model, you're going to have the data as like the core valuation for or core piece of the valuation of your company. So that's that's more important to focus on than how much it costs to acquire, because once it's part of your valuation, then legitimately no one ever cares again how much it costs, because every time it gets better, your valuation goes up by a significant amount. And so it's a revenue generator.
Quick quirk, I think it's kind of like a Web3 quirk to this, is that cool, like your data can be an asset, but with the blockchain, everyone has access to that asset. So it's not like a key differentiator. Or is it the fact that we're able to process and have it within that? That's the key differentiator.
So it's the traditional model for data. You're right, that invalidates it, because it is a static resource that some companies end up putting on their balance sheet. So traditional business model that isn't like data centric or model centric, you're right, that invalidates that portion of it. But really it's the fact that you have access to it and control of it. And if you're doing it right, you are not putting all the data on the blockchain. I understand transparency and all that, but you should be kind of holding some of the sauce back.
Yeah. Oh, not writing, reading from the data. So
gotcha.
That makes sense. Cool.
Yeah, you should be, because you're gathering data and then you're doing something with it. And if you're doing something valuable with it, what comes out of that transformation is the unique piece. That's what's valuable. And so the fact that you have access to it, that's one thing. If everyone has access to it, obviously that's not a value add, but you should be holding something which is unique. And that's what you can monetize.
So it'd be like a feature store would be like the key thing that's like kind of be, maybe it's the feature store is the wrong word, but like all the data transformations that we made and all the features we made, they're like, hey, this is actually really powerful that other people wouldn't have.
No, you're going to do something with that data. It's not like a ETL type do something with it. You're going to transform it. And I mean, transform like in a bigger capital T, not small t. You're going to do some sort of major transformation to that, which creates a unique data set that somebody couldn't easily, grabbing the same data, replicate. And typically it's experimentation that leads you to that novel data set. And that's why I say there's a process that will create data for you. And that's going to be sort of an expense when it comes, down the road, that is partially just to create the data set. Because experimentation, especially novel experiments, are what create the best unique data sets and the highest value unique data sets. And what you can keep proprietary in that case is the nature of the experiment that leads to the high quality data. That'll end up being a competitive advantage until somebody else figures it out. So it's not long term, but I mean, it's one of those things that you can actually monetize the data on top of. And so that's, when you talk about a modern business model built on data, trying to value the data that you have really is a matter of, that's the more important matter, is figuring out how to value it and creating something that's unique that somebody else can't do.
Super helpful. Thanks. I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board, iterative process as always with trying to bring something to market. Yeah,
it's hard.
Do you have any like case studies off the top of your head, maybe that, white papers, some we can look into to get some more context around that? It sounds really fascinating.
Everyone that's figured this out won't talk about it because it's part of their voodoo. Like Facebook knows exactly how to do this. They don't publish it. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to meta. My bad. There's a lot of companies that have figured this out, but it's not something you advertise because just figuring it out is an advantage. You don't want everyone with a data set to suddenly get into business. And now you're buying data. It's almost one of those things where you don't want people to be smart enough to start a business around it because as a large company, it's going to start getting painful.
So for just taking Facebook as an example, they have their data, right? They're the only ones with the access to their users' data. So I could see how in that situation that data is definitely an asset, has some monetary value, right? But what about it, if you're doing like Mark's talking about Web3, if you're just kind of quote like crudely using the word, but just scraping data from the web that anybody can get. So when you do that, that's when you're saying like doing your unique transformations, your unique experiments to then get some meaning out of that data. That is like the intellectual property is what's valuable, not necessarily the data itself, because everybody has access to data, but not necessarily the IP to transform it the way you did, right?
Yeah, I think it was Bessemer that sort of wrote up the basics of what makes data an asset. And it is that it has to be unique. You control the process that creates it. And so if you are the only one who has access to it, you think of Twitter, they control the process, which creates some extraordinary data sets. Meta, same thing. Google, same thing. Amazon, same thing. They all control, and you even look at a smaller company like Uber, they control the creation process for some really interesting data sets. And that's like I said, I think it's Bessemer that came out with that definition. So it's any data generated by a process you control that is not easily duplicated. And so that's how they started valuing startups when it came to, do you actually have data that's worth investing in? Do you actually have models? And it's the same thing. If you build a model, they want to know that it's a model that is not easily replicated. There is some process that you control that created this model. Typically, it's a unique data set or some sort of process that's the intellectual property that led to a model which you will be able to improve faster than anyone that would figure out the same things you did and then try to catch up with you. That was it was a little more convoluted, but the definition of it with data was a whole lot more straightforward and easy to understand. It's just anything that's not something somebody else could do next week or with, 6 months worth of R&D.
Yeah, it's kind of where these, I guess they're called alternative data companies are kind of popping up. That's how they're getting their value from. Like, for example, like the one that I could think of is Bright Data. It's publicly available data, but then how they get it, what they do with it to then make it valuable for you, that's what leads to those high price tags. Okay, that's interesting. How do you spell Bessemer, by the way? Is that Bezemer?
I can never spell it. Bessemer, Bessemer. I can't. Right. I can't spell. I'm sorry. Yeah, my daughter asked me to help her with a spelling test the other day, and one of the words that she asked me for, I got wrong. So, I'm sorry. It's one of my weaknesses.
I've got it here. It's if anybody listening, the link will be in the show notes. So subscribe to the podcast and YouTube channel, you can get that. But Bessemer Venture Partners, Roadmap Data Infrastructure. I think that might be of interest. I'm curious, anybody else? Vivian, can you talk about the type of data you're working with at Meta? Is that?
I don't work with user data. I work with like an internal ticketing system to repair stuff for the data centers. So it's not like really super cool, interesting data that people would want to pump me for.
I think it's super cool and interesting, Vivian. I do.
Well, thank you.
If anybody else has questions or comments on this topic, please do let me know. Mark says that's what Zuck trained her to say. It's quite possible. Speaking of Facebook, man, I was listening to the Lex Friedman podcast with Jan LeCun. Oh my God, that was so good, man. Definitely check that out. It's I've been watching it for well over a week and I'm still not done. It's like almost 4 hours, but some like the philosophy of deep learning that they're talking about is so fascinating. So definitely check that out. A couple of other episodes that were really interesting on Lex Friedman's podcast were with Travis or Trevor Oliphant, the creator of NumPy and Anaconda, and then his business partner Peter Wang, who's still at Anaconda. That's like a super cool insight into like the history of how these packages that we use and take for granted came to being and came into existence. That's fascinating, man. Hearing these guys talk about that stuff. So highly recommend checking those out. Shout out to Lex Friedman. Respond to my email. Come on my show. All right. Anybody got questions or anything? Comments? Let me know. Russell works for a company that builds data centers for Facebook and Meta. Oh, nice. All right. Well, look, if there's no questions, no comments, I guess we can call this one a wrap. It's the last time. Oh, speaking, Web3 and stuff like that. I saw, obviously released the episode with Carlos today, so check that out, everyone. Decentralization for data scientists. But Mark, you might have some insight into this. Like, what was this? I guess heist, for lack of a better word, from the Ethereum blockchain of all this value. Like, what was that all about? I haven't got a chance to like read news or dig into it, but I'm hoping you might be able to illuminate.
That stuff goes beyond me. I can try and give it a shot. I'm just gonna be repeating what Carlos put in the Discord. So Carlos would be the person to talk about. But I guess like you can think of, you have all these various chains. So you have Ethereum, Bitcoin, you have a chain, and then you have like Solana. So like all these different chains, And so there's these things called bridges where, how do you connect different chains to each other? And like basically, how do these different computers keep the same state? And so there was a bug with a certain one, and they call it wormhole F, where basically like millions of like dollars worth of F was corrupted and just lost in the ether, just like deleted. And so like essentially is like the best way I can put it is, say for instance your computer files got corrupted and they were deleted and you can no longer access it, but like those computer files are worth millions of dollars each. That's the best way I can describe what happened in simple terms. And it probably doesn't even come close to like the whole scale of it, but I'm happy to find some cool links and share it with you, to maybe share it to people.
That'd be great. Would love to read into that and learn a little bit more. Cool. Right. Last call for questions. If nobody else got questions, we can go ahead and wrap this up. We'll just shout out a few things happening. Right. So next week, coming up on Wednesday, got the Comet office hours. We're doing a talk on reproducibility, talking about reproducibility in machine learning. Speaking with Tiffany Fabianic, who is data science or rather AI and ML lead at AstraZeneca, as well as one of our own internal experts, head of research at Comet, Dr. Douglas Blank, who he's awesome. He's super knowledgeable. He's got such a huge history in machine learning and robotics. We're going to be talking about reproducibility, and that'll be a lot of fun. So definitely check that out. And coming up for the podcast this week. Yeah, go for it.
Quick question. When you say reproducibility, like, what do you mean by that? Like reproducibility as in like experiments? Because I know common like experiment management, or like reproducibility in the sense of like strong code. Like I feel like there's just so many different angles you can take in the ML space. I'm just very curious what you mean by that.
Yeah, definitely. So keep an eye out for the blog post I'll be releasing on Monday, where I talk all about reproducibility and what that means. But so definitely check out the blog post, tune into the podcast. But at a high level, it's just, like if I give you like my code and my data and you run the thing, you should get the same results as I do, right? But that doesn't always happen. And we need to think about how we can ensure that happens. So a lot of, I guess, best practices that I've collated from a lot of different experts and just kind of putting it all in one place. And yeah, just talking about, reproducibility, machine learning, much like reproducibility in like drug discovery, reproducibility in science type of thing. But yeah, hopefully that entices you to go check out the blog post when it's released. Cool. There's like nobody watching on LinkedIn anyways. So we'll go ahead and call it a evening. Thank you all so much for coming and hanging out. Appreciate you guys spending part of your Friday with me. Just shout out that I'll be back home in Sacramento on the 13th of February until I leave on March 1st or March 2nd, something like that. So definitely want to reach out to everybody who's there. So Mark and Makiko and Vivian and everyone, we're going to be hanging out. So I'll be in touch. Vin, definitely try to find some way to get to Reno. Hopefully I-80 is not like, covered with snow. And
I can also come out there. I mean, it's San Francisco's not, it's like 45-minute flight. We're not far away.
Yeah, we'll definitely be in touch, man. So yeah, want to hang out with everyone. Sadie St. Lawrence as well. I know she lives out in Sacramento, so we'll be having a good time, everybody. I'm looking forward to that. Can't wait to get the hell out of this snow. It's too goddamn cold. I'm done with it. All right, y'all, take care. Have a good rest of the weekend. And tune into the podcast. Remember, it's out. Rate it. Give it 5 stars. Y'all take care. Have a good rest of the evening. Remember, you got one life on this planet. Why not try to do something big? Cheers, everyone.